Good afternoon, everyone. We are extremely thrilled today to host the Alexander String Quartet. Formed just over 30 years ago, they're one of the premier quartets worldwide. Members Zach Garfilo, Frederick Lifshitz, Paul Yarbrough, and Sandy Wilson are based in San Francisco, where they serve as the ensemble in residence for San Francisco performances. You can find more about their ongoing tours and their discography at asq4.com, while San Francisco Performances is, of course, at performances.org. The ASQ has completed a series of string quartet cycles, including the Complete Beethoven and the Complete Shostakovich, both very well done. Their latest works on the Allegro Media Group include pieces by Gershwin and Kern. Today's program will be announced from the stage, but as always, we'll have time for some Q&A at the end. After all, what is the string quartet but the most elevated musical conversation in live music? So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the Alexander String Quartet to Google. Thanks a lot.
It's an incredible pleasure to be here. This very setting with people gathered around comfortably, television cameras, was exactly what Mozart and Haydn had in mind when they were composing their greatest quartets in the 1780s and, in Haydn's case, into the 1790s. The genre really started in the 1750s. Young Haydn started writing some string quartets. A great many composers in southern Germany and northern Italy wrote quartets, although the instruments had been around for some time before that. But this idea of the conversation in the music was really paramount to the string quartet. And as I said, Haydn and his younger counterpart, Mozart, did everything they could to bring the quartet to the point when Mozart died in 1791, the quartet was just a vehicle that was going to last, and it did last. Pretty much almost every great composer to this very day has written at least one. We used to have garages full of scores sent to us from composers around the world. Now we have mailboxes full of them in electronic format. It hasn't stopped. This first work we're going to play for you is one of the last quartets that Mozart wrote. In fact, I think this is the last quartet that he wrote, not the last work. This dates from June of 1790. And he and Haydn had written quartets back and forth for each other, and they actually played in a quartet together with two other composers. It would have been wonderful to eavesdrop on those evenings. But this quartet was written as one of a set of three that was dedicated to the King of Prussia, who was an amateur cellist. He was either a really great cellist or Mozart really wanted to impress him, because the cello writing is extremely difficult in this work. No pressure, Sandy. And we're going to share with you the first movement of this quartet. It starts off using the forces in absolute unison and branches out from there.
For our next selection, we've chosen to play two movements from a quartet by Franz Schubert. Schubert was born just a few years after Mozart's death. He was born in the same city, Vienna, in 1797, and lived only until 1828. He died at the age of 31, having written more than 1,000 works. Was an incredibly prolific composer for such a short lifespan. I think he did nothing but write music pretty much all day long. The two movements that we'd like to play from a quartet that has a nickname, Death and the Maiden. This quartet was written after a poem by a man named Matthias Claudius, and the poem is very short. And first, Schubert wrote a song on the poem, and the story is death has come to take away this young girl, and he's very seductive, and he says, come with me, you're going to love it, it's great, And she says, no, I'm too young, I can't go yet, and he says, no, you're coming, and so basically that's the poem, and the singer who sings it has to kind of do both the voices, the voice of the maiden and the voice of death. Anyway, later on, after having written the song, Schubert wrote a variations movement on the theme from the song, and that's the movement that we're going to play from the string quartet, which then took the title of the poem as its nickname for the entire quartet. The quartet, which is 4 movements, is very much kind of in the same vein as the poem, and there's an amazing thing that Schubert does, which is going between a dark minor sort of tonality, very ominous, to something that's brighter or more optimistic, not necessarily happy, but kind of serene. And it's such a beautiful juxtaposition between these two poles of expression. The first movement that we'll play is actually the second movement from the quartet, and it's titled Andante con moto, and this is the theme and variations movement. And then we'll also play the following movements of Scherzo and trio, and in that movement also you'll hear the contrast between the minor and the major, and the darkness and the light.
that Schubert and Beethoven were alive, working quite hard at the same time at the end of both of their lives. And Schubert and Beethoven, as far as we know, never met. They lived within blocks of one another. And despite this impression of Beethoven being this very tall, imposing figure that you see in statues, especially in Vienna, he apparently was quite short, and Schubert was even shorter. And Schubert was very shy, and he just apparently could never get up the nerve to go and speak to Beethoven, of course, which was difficult also toward the end of Beethoven's life with hearing issues. But Beethoven, at the end of his life, did ask his assistant to bring in some of the scores of this young gentleman's music, and was really, really blown away by it. He could read it like a book. The other kind of ultimate spam box was the coat room in the home of Goethe, the great poet, playwright, and philosopher. He had an assistant that sort of screened his mail. And Schubert had a handful of songs he had put, of poems of Goethe he had put to music. Those poems, those songs, the lieder that he wrote, have been what has made a lot of Goethe's poetry famous in every region of the world where it probably wouldn't have been read otherwise. But at the time, Goethe didn't really know who this guy was and never opened it to see this, at least to see the manuscript of these songs that had been written based on his poetry. These composers, looking back with hindsight, you can always tell a good one. But at the time, it's really hard to see what a winner is. But somehow time seems to have been very kind to these handful of composers. And you'd think that the string quartet was only written and played in Vienna, if you heard the first part of this program. But we're going to move to the 20th century and to England, not necessarily London, but to England and the composer Benjamin Britten. Britten wrote 3 beautiful string quartets. And he wrote earlier than he wrote the string quartets. In 1933, when he was 20 years old, 19, I guess, officially, when he wrote these works. He was born in, as I said, 1913 and died in 1976. He wrote 3 divertimenti, 3 sort of fun pieces, although I wouldn't necessarily call these necessarily fun pieces, but they are fun to play and they're fun to listen to. But as with anything with Benjamin Britten's music, there's a note of seriousness. He was a lifelong pacifist. As a boy in boarding school, he witnessed beatings that were condoned, and perhaps that was that type of thing that led him to become a conscientious objector during World War II. He was in this country. He wrote the famous War Requiem, which is a real statement against man's inhumanity to man. And he took his own art, used his own art to express his feelings, innermost feelings about the way he viewed the world. Composers have often used the string quartet because it's this incredibly transparent, intimate art form to express some of these feelings that they perhaps otherwise wouldn't express in an opera or in a symphony or in some larger scale work. Shostakovich did that in the Soviet Union when he had something to say that he didn't want to be too scrutinized by the upper echelon of the government. So he put it in a string quartet, sort of work it into his music. And the string quartet typically has a small audience, so it didn't get the kind of feature that his operas, which often got him into trouble, did. But this work by Britten is just a charming work. Britten, a lot like Schubert, a lot like Mozart, was writing music from a very, very young age. Felix Mendelssohn was another one. Music just seemed to come out of their pores. And his mother, Benjamin Britten's mother, fully anticipated that her son would become the 4th B after Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. Brahms lived in great fear that Bruckner would become the 4th B. But Britten, I don't know if he's considered the 4th B, but we love his music. So this is 3 movements. The first is a march, and the second movement is a beautiful waltz, and the third movement is a very almost rambunctious country dance. He wrote these pieces, I believe, as descriptions of 3 of his good friends from his youth. And I don't know much more about them, but you can extrapolate what you can from hearing these 3 vignettes. The repertoire is so vast that if we spent, as we have, our entire adult lives, supposedly we are adults, playing this music, we'll never get through it all, not on the level that we want to play it. So we're very fortunate in terms of that. And the vehicle, the string quartet as an art form and as a vehicle for music and to get places, to go places as an ensemble is remarkable. The four of us, all we really need are 4 chairs. Well, we could play 3 of us standing up, and Sandy actually doesn't sound too bad when he stands up with the cello. I think he and Yo-Yo Ma have the record on that. But 4 chairs. We bring our own stands with us. We buy a seat for Sandy's cello wherever we go in the world. It often flies first or business class. It doesn't play word or anything. Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. But if you see 4 people with instruments sitting in 4 separate sections of the plane, you know it's probably a string quartet and not speaking to each other. But we do spend a lot of time together. And then the 4 of us can go into a wonderful setting like this here at Google. We can go in, as we do through San Francisco performances, through so many other means, into classrooms, into inner city schools to play for, in an even closer setting than this, children, high school students who perhaps never had the opportunity to hear something like this in their lives, and they stand or sit 3 feet away from Sandy's cello or something. They can feel the vibrations in a way that their electronic reproductions just don't give when they listen to music, and it becomes an extraordinarily visceral experience. So the quartet, as an art form, it's a lot easier to get around than a symphony. The repertoire is vast. Not to be mistaken that I don't value symphonic repertoire or other things. Don't have to tune it like a piano. We just tune 16 strings instead of 600. But now it's your turn. If you have any questions at all, anything you've been dying to know, anything you'd like to know, please.
Thank you very much. Can you tell us a bit more about the circumstances under which some of the early quartets of, Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven were performed? Were they done for members of the public or for friends? Did they do an entire couple of quartets in an evening, or did they just play individual movements, things like that?
Well, great question. Something we have to bear in mind when we play this music, that it was almost entirely inaccessible to the general public, really. It was the domain of the aristocracy. These were people who lived in palaces and had the funds to have a retinue of musicians, perhaps, in their employ. Or they were just from finer families in Vienna who would have musicales and would invite the interesting musicians of the day to come and perform in their home. And if you were fortunate enough to have an invitation, you could hear the music. Or if you were among the very few people, but a growing class of people who actually were beginning to rise up into a sort of a beginning middle class, and those people could actually afford to learn to play instruments and enjoy the music in their own, this music has 2 purposes. One is a performance aspect, and the other is a participation aspect. And so during the early years, it was considered a mark of very good training and breeding that you could take a hand and play a part in a string quartet with other people who were like-minded. And that was a sort of, you might say, a kind of an Enlightenment idea. That everyone could play and participate in this music, which is such a rarefied thing. And those people, when they came to hear a concert or a performance of some kind, had expectations. They knew the music, how it would be structured, what was likely to be the formal structure of each of the movements in the quartet, and there wasn't the same prohibition against clapping between movements, or even at that point during movements. If you were turned on by something that was done in the moment, just like you would in a jazz kind of performance, somebody takes a solo and everybody claps, and then it moves on. But it was that was not so unusual in those times. Now it's become this kind of stiff thing, which we try to some extent to counteract the stuffiness or formality of classical music concerts. On the other hand, we appreciate too when people are really attentive and silent and not clinking glasses and talking loudly and so forth. So I know some of the jazz musicians, they say, we say, gosh, this club environment is so cool, it seems so personal and so unstuffy. And they say, yeah, but people are drinking and talking while you're playing, they kind of crave what we have, the silent audience in a concert hall. Anyway, I hope I answered your question adequately.
There's also some wonderful stories of the composers themselves playing together, Mozart and Haydn getting together, reading through their latest string quartets, and that's kind of how they communicated. It was like, I can do that better than you kind of thing. But for us musicians, thinking about being a fly on the wall, watching some of these reading sessions is just amazing. I wish I could go back and see what that must have been like, hearing first performances of those works.
So I'm curious if you could comment on, there's a lot of discussion about sort of the impact of technology on the music industry lately and the transition to digital. And a lot of that is more about popular music, and I know classical is sort of a much smaller niche in terms of the recording industry, but if you could comment on what impact that's had on your career, which has obviously spanned that transition, and also how you feel like it's impacted classical music overall.
I think very well. I think we're still here, we're thriving. We actually, over 30 years, we've certainly seen a lot of changes. It's a hell of a lot less expensive to record now, and the ability to record really well and to control the circumstances under which your work is encoded for posterity. We have a lot more influence over that. Of course, it's prolific, and the ability to saturate the market with substandard work is unfortunate.
Along those lines, we actually, after many unfortunate experiences of recording and trying to have our work distributed well and nurtured, if you will, after the fact of our making recordings, we decided that the only alternative was to make our own company. So we started our own record label about 20 years ago. We have done work for other labels, but we pride ourselves in this set of recordings that we've made, and the amount of time and love we lavish on these projects, not only the musical side of it, but also the information inside the booklets and the photography and the graphic design and everything. And we read now that most people under a certain age have never even bought a CD. They get everything electronically and probably without paying for it. So that's a matter of some concern. But I still think there are a lot of people who like the physical, the tangible product, and don't mind buying it and keeping it. Maybe then they put it on their different devices and use it in different ways. But I, for one, still like to sit down and look at liner notes while I listen to a piece of music and enjoy whatever commentary the artists themselves might have included in the booklet. So hopefully there's still going to be a market for just hard product of recordings. But the other thing is, we do have to be a little bit involved in this, change and the revolution that's involved. We play 250-year-old instruments and 200-something-year-old music a lot of the time and all, but we're still 21st century artists, and we need to be up to date, at least somewhat. Anyway, I don't know if that's a good...
I was going to add that my friends who've done very well, often in business similar to Google, have all been buying vinyl and paying a lot of money, in some cases, for record covers that have smudges on them and other things, sometimes with great history, which you can't do with certain other things. So it's kind of I know it's a small niche, but it's an interesting thing. And a lot of the great recording engineers we work with say that the analog still is their preferred mode of listening to things. And so, it depends on who you talk to. But the control issue that Sandy talked about and Paul was fabulous. I mean, we did a Beethoven cycle for BMG years ago, and I think at a certain point it just got buried. And they owned it anywhere in the universe, in any format. And then when we did our own, they re-released our old one to try to compete with it. And that's just the way the world works. But we had the choice to do our own, and as Paul also mentioned the old music, but we do a lot of new music too, and are able to commission works through friends and through other means, foundations, and that's a very vital thing. Part of what we feel that the quartet shouldn't be a museum piece. It really should be living today as well.
I was just going to say also there are, of course, wonderful technologies that are costly, but and therefore I think they still remain in the domain of the major mega labels. But we have had a chance to do some surround sound recordings recently, the 24-bit, the extra dimensions, and you know, we actually haven't heard the results of that yet. So the vote's still out on whether it's something we should aspire to. But I know that there are wonderful technologies. One thing that we would love to try to figure out how to do is to manage to record in an acoustical setting in a way that we could isolate our voices, you know, sort of, kind of in a pie sort of a sense. So you can do music -1 or 2 or 3, you know, and I know an awful lot of very accomplished amateur musicians would love to sit in. And
Or if you just-
so we've yet to figure out how to manage that.
Or if you just got tired of hearing me play.
Quite
you
fun,
could
yeah.
do it.
But the act of actually doing it is still a challenge. Of accomplishing that isolation and still keeping the sight lines, and you know, anyway, that's just things to play around with.
I have 2 questions. One of it, I am very curious about your individual instrument. If you can show us and then maybe tell me about those things, like how many years old and how you like it and kind of stuff. And the other thing is that I was sitting over there and there was a speaker there. And it really magnifies the music in one way or the other. And I'm really, really curious to see without anything at all. And then, you know, what it used to be when they had in a big castle in a little room and listening to. So I was wondering if we can get the opportunity to actually have that experience.
You can give it a shot like the Emperor's New Clothes. First about the instruments. You want to start with the first violin.
This is a modern fiddle made in 1992 by a German maker named Michael Fischer. It's a copy of a Guarneri del Gesù.
And you've played that in the Del Gesù. We actually played the Library of Congress.
That's right.
Quite recently.
There's the real model at the Library of Congress that was owned by Fritz Kreisler that I played on a couple years ago, which is, when I played on it, I was like, wow, it's like my old violin. So I was quite pleased to play on that violin.
Yeah, the security folks were kind of
they were watching me
pretty
very
careful, trying to get out of the Library of Congress with a
It'd be a
fiddle.
great movie, but
They did that already.
strip search on aisle 3. But this violin is made by a maker named Francis Kuttner. He lives in San Francisco and in Cremona, Italy, most of the time in Cremona. And he made this violin in 2006 for me. He made a set of instruments for a good friend of ours that we've actually recorded a number of CDs on that were modeled on the Stradivari instruments. This one is more his own design. And Sandy plays also, I just tie that in, on a cello by Francis Kuttner, but much older.
Well, not much. This one is 1980. I didn't buy it in 1980. I acquired this just about 5 years ago, but it's and I still have a lovely 1702 cello at home. And if everybody wants to buy a nice 19th century French cello, see me afterwards. but this was the gold medal winner in the VSA, the International Violin Building Competition, in that year, and I love it. We can tell you a little bit about why we play modern instruments. Some of us.
Or why I don't.
He can't afford it. He hasn't paid him enough.
Yeah, this one is this is the only the instrument in the quartet that actually could have participated in the premiere performance of any of these works that we've played today, because it was made in 1750 in Genoa, Italy. The maker's name is Castello, and you know, I play modern instruments too from time to time, and I often love them very much. It's a sort of a myth that the only good instruments are old ones. Instruments do tend to improve with age, but if they weren't really great to start with, they're not going to become great with time. So finding an instrument that's really right for you as an individual, that you're able to express yourself on, is the trick. And if you're lucky enough to be able to find a new one, that's nice because it's a lot less expensive. The old ones are very valuable for sort of antique and collectible reasons, but not necessarily for the quality of the sounds that they make.
With the exception of the really great ones, and we're talking about instruments in many cases that are Stradivari and Guarneri instruments that are valued about $6 million, $6 million. And none of us want to sell our children or pets or anything to buy them.
I don't think my kids would bring that much.
Yeah, that's right. But
think about it.
But they are magnificent. I have to say that when we get together and play with friends who do play on these instruments and you hear them side by side, these do very well. You asked an important question: do we love them, or how do we like them? And the answer is I really do love the instrument. And all of us have played on some older instruments, and I'm also selling an instrument, not here today, but it's because I think it should be played by a young player that really loves it, and I don't need to have more than one instrument. I also have another instrument that's in that set that we use quite often, and it's modeled, as I said, on the Stradivari, and it's a little brighter, and as a second violinist, I tend more to use it in the quartet, and right now it's getting a new bridge on it. Francis has flown in from Cremona for a few weeks, so I play on this, which is my own. But I love them both. And we have to make sure that our colleagues are happy with our instruments, whether we like it or not. The four of us are practically married in that regard. And if things aren't happy at home, it's just not happy. So when I was buying this violin, Sandy said, I wasn't quite sure if I was going to buy an instrument, and Sandy said, it'll make your life a lot easier. And sometimes it does. But you wanted to hear them without any amplification. I think we can do that. A section, second one of Mozart, something fresh. This won't be a listening quiz. This will be just the first part of the second movement of the Mozart quartet, marked Allegretto. This is a lovely space, and we do appreciate our fantastic engineer. Gives us.
Just want to do the exposition?
Yeah.
vote. Better with or without?
Sorry.
Number 2, okay.
You have a question? Yeah.
So I remember when I was studying chamber music, my group would listen to tons of recordings of other groups playing the same pieces and evaluate them and decide which ways we liked best and watch tons of YouTube videos of different performances. But I was wondering, once you're like an established quartet, do you ever go check out like the St. Lawrence Quartet in residency at Sanford to hear some of their performances? Or I know members of the San Francisco Symphony sometimes do like Sunday chamber music performances for fun. Do you ever listen to any of those, or
That's a great
draw from
question.
other groups?
I don't know the St. Lawrence. No, I'm just kidding. It's funny. We don't. Yes and no. Part of it's some of us do more than others. Some of us past. Sometimes Zach, who knows how to use YouTube, will send us. And other things will send us things to listen to. I used to listen up quite a bit when we first started and the quartet lived in New York. I would go to hear a number of quartets because you just walk out your door in Lincoln Center and hear all your colleagues and see them. Now I tend to just bump into people in airports and chat about families and kids and old teachers. But it is important, I think, to listen to other artists play. In my particular situation, my feeling is I listen to other works in other genres outside of the string quartet. I'll do a lot more listening to songs, opera by these various composers. And we all like a lot of music, and there's only so much time in the day. And I also, if I wanted to listen to something in my car, it's usually going to be what my kids want to listen to. I have a 7-year-old and a 14-year-old, so you can use your imagination. It's not Mozart string quartets, even though they like to come once in a while to the concert. But I do occasionally hear things, and the answer is I do learn from my colleagues and from young groups that come and play for us. We've had a couple of groups like the Afiara and others that have worked with us. They've become world-class ensembles, and they will send us things. Zach just is working on producing their first recording, and I learn a lot from hearing other people, but I particularly don't spend a lot of time. I think you listen more.
I listen a fair amount still. When I was a student, I used to listen to recordings quite a bit, and I still have a lot of recordings that I go back to. I don't listen as much as I did in the past. I probably would like to listen to more. Going to live concerts, probably hardly ever nowadays, mostly because we're so busy. We're so busy teaching, we're so busy rehearsing, playing our own concerts. So, and I don't know if I had the free time, if I would necessarily want to go to see string quartets. I think since we spend so much time doing it ourselves, like what Fred said, kind of getting away from what we do every day is kind of nice. But I spend a fair amount of time on YouTube and watch videos and listen to recordings, and it's fun when I do have the time late at night.
I have to chime in. There was recently there was a movie. Some of you may have seen it called A Late Quartet. It was mostly in like art cinema houses and such. But Philip Seymour Hoffman and Christopher Walken were in this movie. They were both in the string quartet, and I went at the sort of urging of a friend of mine who really wanted to see it and really wanted me to come and see it too with her. And so I went. And I thought I was going to hate it because I thought it was just going to be, baloney. It's not really like this, And of course, then you have to watch these people who don't really play instruments pretend to be playing instruments, which is kind of painful for us. But in the end, I really thought it was terrific. I haven't been able to persuade anyone else to go see it.
I went to see it, and it wasn't showing anymore.
Yeah, but it really was quite well done, I thought. And they did a lot of fact-checking, and they must have had some great consultation to get the internal things in quartets kind of right. It was funny. One of the first scenes, there's some problem. After which we discover that the cellist has incipient Parkinson's disease. But the first violinist stops and he says, "Our vibratos aren't matching." And I went like, did I hear him say that? Because it's exactly the thing that we would say to one another, So they really did do a good job in that. I had to tell you about that because I thought that movie, it was very kind of insightful for what you asked. Do we still immerse ourselves in all this stuff? And to some extent we do, but also we need a break.
Hi, thank you very much. How have your careers evolved differently than perhaps the vision you set yourselves when you first started? And what, as you're trying to establish yourselves as young artists, what sort of hurdles did you face that perhaps surprised you and you had to find creative solutions for?
Well, if you had told me when I was 19 years old that at the age I am now, which I won't say, that I would be playing in a string quartet, performing widely, teaching at a university, teaching music, I would have said, and making a living, I would have said, where do I sign? I mean, that was, this life that I live is almost exactly what I dreamt of as a young musician starting out. So I'm really very, very fortunate. As far as the challenges that we faced, I think the hardest part has always been that as a quartet, you're like a small startup, a business where you can't afford to just do your own narrow area of expertise. You have to wear a lot of hats, and everybody has to be willing to do things that weren't necessarily part of their curriculum in conservatory, you know, like think about finances and grant applications and how to organize students into chamber music ensembles and keep the ruffled feathers from flaring up. And I mean, we do a lot of things for ourselves. We book our own travel. We make all our own, we drive our own rental cars, and you know, everything is kind of small scale. And if you like that, you know, if that kind of endeavor is fulfilling, then this is great. If you really hate doing anything for your, you know, I mean, the symphony musicians, they sit their suitcases outside their hotel room, and someone picks it up and puts it in the truck, and they show up when they're supposed to be there, and you know, play their instruments, and that's pretty much it. They don't really need to do all these other things. For us, it's impossible for us to hire people to do everything that we need to do. So as a small business, we're kind of on our own.
I never thought I would agree 100% with Paul, because in string quartet you hardly do. But actually, I think he said it quite beautifully, that I grew up watching two things growing up in Boston, the Boston Celtics and the great string quartets that came through to Harvard University and to Sanders and to Jordan Hall and other things. And it was my dream to play second violin in one of the great quartets, because I was enamored with some of the second violinists. So on my other side of that was the Boston Celtics, but I was a little challenged in some areas there. So I play on other types of parquet floors, but with a violin. So I think when I joined the quartet, there's another thing about, I talked to my brothers who are in business and in software and other things, and another thing about the quartet, when I joined this quartet, I fully anticipated that I would lose a little hair, become gray, and see myself, I saw myself as a lifetime commitment. That was 26 years ago when I joined these guys, and I haven't changed that sense of commitment to it. It's not that I don't, we do from time to time get upset with each other. We function as a group like a democracy, and we don't have majority rule. All four of us have to agree 100% on every decision we make, whether it's where we play, what fee we accept, what airline we fly, or if we fly separate flights. All this stuff we have to agree 100%, or we don't do it. So 3-1 doesn't win. So that also has kept us very vested in what we do. But as far as a career, as far as the dreams of a young kid, I mean, until I look in the mirror, I still think I'm like 16 or 17 years old, and according to my wife, I act a little younger. So I fully anticipated, as Paul said, I would be doing this. I'd be here with you all today, playing Schubert and Mozart and loving it. So I'm pretty lucky.
Thank you for coming today. I was wondering if you could comment on this sort of interplay between technique and musicality, and whether you're making decisions based on expediency or based on the quality of the music.
That's a really great question, and I think that's something that we, as professional musicians, struggle with throughout our careers, trying to find ways to be efficient but still speak to the music. I don't know if I have a real answer for you. I think it's something that, like I said, we struggle with every day. We rehearse every day for 4 or 5 hours in the morning, and these are the kinds of things that we talk about. We're constantly checking each other. Is this a good musical idea? Does this make sense interpretively? But we're also talking about mechanics too, the mechanics of playing together, the mechanics of playing in tune, the mechanics of matching our vibratos, matching the bow speeds. So there's always a balance there between those two things, the mechanics of playing and playing together and being musical and interpreting the music the best possible way. Yeah.
It's something that's particularly rewarding when you do it in an intimate team like this with 3 other people, because you draw on the aptitudes and the strengths of one another. There are some things that somebody's going to hate to do, but somebody else just loves to roll up their sleeves and get in with that. So we might have the intonation Nazi, or the vibrato Nazi, or the guy who's going to say, no, we just have to routine this. We're going to slow this down. We're doing this spot. We're doing that spot. But the process, we've refined it. There are sometimes when we're really under the gun and we go into the practice room and say, we really have to microwave this. It's we're not going to make it on time. We pull extra rehearsals. We do what we have to do, and our families pay. They really. It's a family business. We all have spouses and kids, and it's tough. It's really, I don't think that many orchestral musicians, professionals, really understand what the life of a string quartet is. They will tell us, and we'll nod in appreciation when they'll tell us, "Oh, you guys are so lucky. You just, it's fantastic. You're doing everything we wanted to do." But it's like Paul says, these guys just show up at the concert. The bus takes them there, and their tailcoats are already pressed, their shoes are polished. They just have to go out, play the concert, and then that's it. It's not like that. This is really it's a grind, but the reward is that we are all doing exactly what I think we aspired to do, even if we didn't know we did. It's so satisfying, to go to work and to have people applaud, it's a wonderful privilege. I think we recognize that it's a privilege. We really do recognize we've been very lucky to be still doing this into our 4th decade now.
I think what the great thing about the quartet, and I think what a lot of young people get excited about it, is that you are a member of a team, you're a part of an ensemble, but you're also a soloist because of the transparency. You're the only one who's playing that part in the group. And so you have really the best of both worlds. And it's a fine balancing act. I also have to say, much like Sandy just said, that when my colleagues, I used to play for a few years in the Boston Symphony, when my colleagues come and hear us play or hear us on the radio or hear one of our recordings, and they say, "You've gotten so much better." I can't imagine how bad I was at the time, but it's really a testament to the kind of criticism, daily criticism, and support that we get from one another. Because we know that you have to balance, and I think it's true in any business. You have to balance how hard you push each other with the effectiveness with the overall health of the organization. And we're not an organization where people quit very often or resign or leave. Been very few changes in the quartet, and I'm the second violinist in 31 years, and Zach is maybe the first violinist. The first one didn't stay very long. The second one did for a few years, and the third one 10 years, and the third one 10 years. Yeah. So, but we go through first violinist. But we've also known Zach a long time. We've known him since he was a kid in San Francisco. So it's a real balancing act in the work that we have to do. Thank you for having us today. The San Francisco performance is for Virginia for bringing us down here. We don't live that far away, so if you ever want to have us back, I think you know how to find us. And you can Google us and find out more. I always wanted to say that here. And because it's part of our life. I mean, and I mean, my kids think they're so smart because they can Google everything, and that's not a substitute for intelligence, but it's very useful. It's really been a pleasure, and we'll.
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, but and thank you, Cliff, so much for all this. So we'll be packing our things up. If you want to take a look at the instruments or chat a little bit, some of us won't be running right out the door. So, thank you.